everybody, Miss Kathy here. I'm getting ready to read the history journal lesson to the kindergarten and first graders, and anybody's welcome to listen. And we're going to read the stories of the Pilgrims, or it's been reprinted called Pilgrim Stories by Margaret Pumphrey. We're going to read a little section out of that. So you want to get your history journal, and the page that we're going to work on today is going to have the picture of the three pictures on it in one. And so you can get your history journal out, and I'll show you in just a second. Let's flip the screen. All right, take a look. Stories of the Pilgrims by Margaret Pumphrey. And like I said, here's the page that you're going to turn to. I've already written on one, but I have one that I will write on. It should be the page after John Smith's coat of arms. Sorry, we're about to write about King James, so I got a little mixed up there. I'm sorry these pictures are so small. In the book, they're actually out of this book, and they had to reprint them with permission. The curriculum, Beautiful Feet curriculum, so I guess they only got permission to print them pretty small. So we're going to be looking at this picture today, and we're going to write the sentence above so that we can have a room to write about this picture in the middle, and then we'll write about this picture on the bottom. All right. Let me begin. Stories of the Pilgrims. Written by Margaret P. Pumphrey. Revised and edited by Michael J. McHugh. All right, I'm going to turn to page 13. Actually, that is probably in the original publishing. Mine is probably very old. Or in the second publishing. Mine is probably older. It said read 13 to 25, but I have a feeling I'm supposed to read page 1. Sorry. All right. This would have been a fun picture to color. And it says, this was a busy day at Scrooby Inn. At Scrooby Inn. This is going to be kind of a long story, but I'm going to start. So, hang on a second if I can hold this properly. In the little village of Scrooby in England, 300 years ago, stood a beautiful old house. It was the largest one in the village, and its moss-covered roof and large red chimneys rose high above the cottages around it. The house stood close to the street, but behind it was a large garden where many bright flowers bloomed, and a row of tall trees cast their pleasant shade. On one side of the garden were 3 round ponds. For 100 years, these ponds had never failed to supply fish for the Friday dinner. A great rosebush clung to the walls of the house. For years it had climbed and climbed until now some of its clustering red blossoms peeped into one of the upper windows. The whole room was sweet with their fragrance. This old house had once been a fine palace, but now it was used as an inn where travelers might stay for the night. In the stables beyond the garden, there were some horses that belonged to the king. When his messengers carried his letters to the north country, they always stopped here to change horses and rest for an hour. Only a few miles from Scrooby was a famous old forest. Every child in the village knew the story of Robin Hood and his merry men who had once lived in this forest. They often played Robin Hood. It was the game they liked best of all. You can take a look at the picture. They were cooking. They didn't have a stove like we have. They had to cook in big pots right over the fire and hang them up in the hearth. But they did have an oven to bake their bread and pies. You can kind of look at their clothing. Take a look. We'll note that a little bit later. See what's going to happen. Once a party of the king's friends who were going to the forest to hunt had stayed all night at the inn. This was a time always remembered by the children who lived at Scrooby Inn. They seemed never to tire of talking about the packs of hounds, the beautiful horses, and the riders in their colorful hunting dress. There was the dinner in the great dining hall, and best of all, the long evening when they all sat around the fireplace and listened to the stories the hunters told. The landlord, William Brewster, had not been pleased to have his children hear so much about life at the king's court, so they had been sent to bed much earlier than they wished. The next morning when they awoke, the noisy hunting party had gone. Had they really been there at all? Was it not all a bright dream? One June morning, Jonathan Brewster brought into the garden the new boat he had just finished. He was going to sail it upon the fish pond. His little sisters, Fear and Patience, stood watching the tiny boat make its first trip across the pond. Fear held in her arms a small wooden doll, very ugly, but very dear to the little mother. Jonathan wanted the doll for a passenger, but Fear would not put her baby in the boat until she was sure it would not tip over. The little ship had hardly touched the other side when a distant sound made the children spring to their feet and listen. Again they heard the long, clear sound of the bugle. "It's the king's messenger. Run and tell Henry to get a fresh horse," cried Patience. But Jonathan was already far down the path, calling the stable boy as he ran. Patience drew the forgotten ship out of the water and ran into the house to tell her father. Here's a better up close at the picture. Right? There was a high stone wall around the house and garden, and just outside the wall a ditch filled with water. The bridge over the ditch might be drawn up so that none could cross, but this was not often done. When Master Brewster came out to unlock the great iron gate, Patience and little Fear were close at his side. They always felt afraid of the tall messenger who looked so stern and said so little, but they loved to hear the clatter of swift hoofs and to see horse and rider dash through the gate into the yard. They had not long to wait. Again the sound of the bugle was heard, very near this time. Another minute, and into the village street galloped the beautiful black horse bearing the king's messenger. The stable boy ran to meet him at the gate and held the horse's head while the man sprang to the ground. "I have a message for you, Master Brewster," he said. "Queen Anne, with her knights and ladies, journeys from her home in the north. They will rest for the night in your house." Patience waited to hear no more, but flew into the house to tell her mother this wonderful news. "Mother, oh, Mother," she called, "where is Mother?" From room to room she ran until she found her quiet, sweet-faced mother at her spinning wheel. "Oh, Mother, the Queen is coming here to stay all night. She has ever so many knights and ladies and servants with her. May I help get the best bedroom ready for the Queen? The messenger has come, and he is telling Father all about it." "What are you talking about? You are excited, Patience." "The child is right," said her father, who had just come into the room. "The Queen is on her way to her new home in England, you know, and the party will spend the night here. There's little time to prepare for royal guests, but we will make them welcome," said Mistress Brewster quietly. All right, before we go on, I'm going to ask you a few questions. See if you can remember from what I just read. Okay, the first one is, what had this beautiful old house been before it was used as an inn for travelers? Do you remember? What had the beautiful old house been? Let's look back and see and do you remember the name? Scrooby Inn? Remember, it was the largest house in the village? And what had it been? It had been there for 100 years for sure. Does it say? Here it is. This old house had once been a fine palace, but now it was used as an inn where travelers might stay for the night. Okay, let's see what the next question says. Why were some of the king's horses kept in the stables? You remember? What did they do? They stayed there, but people came and went. Let's look back in our reading to see. In the stables beyond the garden, there were some horses that belonged to the king. When his messengers carried his letters to the north country, they always stopped here to change horses and rest for an hour. Oh, so the king kept horses there to change. Horses aren't like cars. They get tired. They need to rest. They need to eat. And so horses were kept at this place, and some horses would come with the messengers, and they would leave those horses there to rest, and they would get a fresh horse from this inn and take it on. Okay, last question. What did the children enjoy most of all about the hunting party stopping in at the inn? Remember? What did they want to do? But their parents actually did what? Sent them to bed. What did they like most? Well, they liked to talk about what happened. They liked to hear the stories, right? They seemed never to tire of talking about the packs of hounds, the beautiful horses, the riders in their colorful hunting dresses. But what did they like to hear about? Ooh, they liked to hear the stories of what had happened. And the stories, it's kind of like getting the news. The stories of what was happening with the king and at the king's court. All right, next chapter, a royal guest. Take a look at this picture. Who's coming to dinner? Do you remember? What's her name? She's about to be the Queen of England, Queen Anne. She looked down at the children and smiled, is what it says down here. Let's see. Okay, a royal guest. This was a busy day at Scrooby Inn. Before the sun had set, the large house with its 50 rooms had been made ready to receive the party. The long table in the dining hall was spread with the finest linen. In the kitchen, the 3 big brick ovens were filled with browning bread, cakes, and other dainties. Fowls were being roasted before the open fire. Who knows what a fowl is? We're being roasted before the open fire. What on earth does that mean? What's a fowl? Anybody? Well, maybe you've answered to your mom or your dad or whoever might be listening with you, but a fowl is a bird, any type of bird. So a chicken could have been being roasted before the open fire, or a pheasant. At this time, people often hunted for pheasants. It might have even been a magpie. It might have been a dove. There may have been many birds being roasted before the open fire. It could have been a turkey. Forgot to mention that. That would feed a lot of people. It was probably a turkey, maybe a few chickens, maybe several turkeys. Many times that afternoon, the children ran to an upper window to look for the royal guest. The sun sank lower and lower, but still they did not come. Perhaps they have lost their way, said Fear. Boy, what do you think about a name like that? Fear. I certainly wouldn't want to name my little girl Fear. But maybe there's another meaning for fear. Not being afraid, but maybe the fear of the Lord. I don't know. We're going to find out. Perhaps they've lost their way, said Fear. They will have a guide so they cannot lose their way, replied Jonathan. But perhaps they have been met by robbers. In those days, travelers were often overtaken by bands of rough men who robbed them of money and horses. So Jonathan's words filled their hearts with dismay. There were 3 very sober little faces in the window. What does that mean? 3 very sober little faces. Let's look back here. Jonathan's words filled their hearts with dismay. Well, that doesn't sound happy, does it? No, it's sadness. And sober in this case means there were 3 very little sober faces. They weren't smiling. They might have even been frowning, or they might have just been looking very serious. So they were looking serious when they were looking out the window because they were concerned that the queen and her party, her group of people traveling with her, maybe have gotten caught by bandits or robbers. But before the sun was quite gone, the thrilling note of a bugle was heard, and those faces brightened in a moment. Out of the little grove far down the road appeared a company of horsemen. Near and near they came until the first rider, proudly bearing the red and gold banner of his queen, was in plain view. Upon the shining spears and plumed helmets of the knights who rode behind him fell the last rays of the setting sun, making them glisten like gold. Within the square formed by the horsemen was a splendid coach, heavily carved and richly gilded. That means it probably was covered with some gold or even silver or some other precious metal or stone. Upon the driver's seat rode 2 coachmen dressed in colorful clothing of red and gray. 2 footmen sat upon the high seat behind. The coach was drawn by 6 fine black horses which arched their beautiful necks and daintily lifted their slender feet as they sped toward the village. The party was soon so near that the sound of the horses' feet could be heard, and sometimes the clear ringing of their silver bridles. The news of the royal visit had spread through the town, and at every gate was a group of villagers eager to greet the queen and her party. As they rode through the street, the air rang with cries of, "Long live the Queen! Long live the Queen!" The great gates of Scrooby Inn were thrown open, and a maid was sent to bring the children into the garden, where William Brewster and his entire household had gathered to receive the Queen. There was a moment of breathless waiting. Then over the bridge and into the yard swept the dazzling company of knights and the splendid coach. The footmen sprang to the ground and opened the doors. Again rang the cry, "Long live the Queen!" Jonathan waved and shouted with the rest, but little Patience was silent. As she glanced from one to another of the 4 ladies who stepped from the coach, a look of disappointment clouded her face. She was looking for a lady with many strings of jewels around her bare throat and a sparkling crown upon her head. Patience had seen pictures of many queens. All had worn crowns and jewels. Surely there was no queen in this party. "Jonathan, where's the queen? I do not see her," she whispered, tears of disappointment filling her eyes. "Hush, hush," answered Jonathan softly. "This is she in the blue velvet gown and the hat with the long white plumes." What are plumes? Take a look. See if the picture shows. The plumes are the long white feathers. Let's see. You did not think she would wear a crown when traveling, did you? Perhaps the lady may have heard something, for she looked down at the children and smiled. As Patience looked into the kind, beautiful face, her disappointment melted away, and she forgave the queen for not wearing her jewels. Jonathan and Patience and Fear saw very little of the queen and her company that night, for Mistress Brewster believed that children should be neither seen nor heard when there were strangers at the inn. It seemed very hard to go to bed at the usual time when there were knights and a real queen in the house. They were sure they could not go to sleep, but when Mistress Brewster went to their beds half an hour later, all 3 were in a dreamland of kings and queens, knights and ladies, castles and deep forests. And we're almost to our picture. Patience wakened very early the next morning. She dressed quickly and went down to the garden to gather fresh flowers for the breakfast table. Yet early as she was, someone was there before her. A lady was bending over a bush of beautiful roses. When she turned, Patience saw it was the queen. The child bowed in the quaint, pretty way her mother had taught her. She was wondering whether she ought to go back into the house when the lady smiled and said, "I am admiring your roses. How fresh and pretty they are, with the dew still on them." "This bush is my very own," said Patience as she gathered some blossoms for the lady. "I call these the Bradford roses because William Bradford gave the bush to me." "And who is William Bradford?" "Oh, he is a young friend of Father's. He does not live in Scrooby, but he comes here to church every Sunday, and so do Master Chilton and his family and ever so many others. We have a large chapel in our house right over the dining room. Nearly everyone in Scrooby comes here to church, and some people come as far as 20 miles. Wow. "I noticed a beautiful church as we rode through the village yesterday," the lady said. "I should think you would all go there." "Oh, that is King James's church," answered Patience. "If we go there, we have to worship just as he wishes us to. Father thinks the king's way is not right. Almost everyone around here says the king's way is not right, so we do not go to his church." Wow. Patience was saying that to the queen, or soon-to-be queen. "King James would not like to hear that," said the queen gently, "and it would not be safe for you to talk to every stranger so freely." Poor little Patience. What had she said? Suddenly she remembered that she had been telling a very great secret. Her face turned as red as the roses, and her eyes filled with tears. "Never mind, little one," said the queen kindly. "Your secret is safe with me. Let us forget all about it." Then she talked to the child about the flowers, and Patience took her to see the lilies that grew in one of the ponds in the garden. An hour later, 3 children stood at the gate of Scrooby Inn, watched a gilded coach and a company of horsemen disappear down the road. Soon the coach was gone, and the last glistening spear was lost to sight. Although she never saw her again, Patience always remembered the beautiful queen who shared her secret. The next chapter is called Meeting in Secret. Wow. Sounds like that might have been a little bit dangerous for them. Certainly it was a secret, as she said, shared that her father and the other people in the town did not think the king's way was right. Because if you go to his church, you have to worship just the way he wishes you to. We're going to find out more about that. But now get your paper. And we're going to, I forgot to tell you, you could have been coloring. It's kind of a small picture, and there's not a lot of choices to color, but you could still color it. You could certainly color around the picture, maybe even put the roses around, or draw a picture of the house behind it, Scrooby Inn. But what we're going to write, let me close this so I can put this down. We're going to write this sentence. "King James would not like to hear that," said the queen gently. Remember that was from the story? "King James would not like to hear that," said the queen gently. And I'm going to get my pencil, and I'm going to change to the new paper so I can help you write it. I printed out an extra one. Okay, let me hold this. So something we're going to have today that we've never had before is quotation marks. And they're two little tiny curved shapes that we're going to put them before we start the sentence. And then we're going to put them after this comma, which you all know what a comma is, because this is the part that the Queen said. She actually said those words. King James would not like to hear that. End of quotation, said the Queen gently. So when someone, you may have said in your stories, in your regular journal, you may have had somebody saying something, a dialogue, but you may not have put it in quotations before, or I may have done it, or your mom may do it when you're dictating to them. I know I've done it sometimes when it's been a verse in the Bible, like our verse that we are doing this week, John 3:16, because Jesus actually said that. So we could put it in quotations, but let's start this. I'm going to make the quotation marks like this, quotations. And I'm going to write this sentence right up here at the top, and it's for this picture. Then we'll write the sentence for this picture in the middle, and then we'll write the sentence for this picture at the bottom. Okay, let's see if I can do this. So, King James, and we have to start with a capital because the sentence starts with a capital. Also, it's a proper noun. I'm working on a pillow here, so it may be kind of wiggly. King, so capital K-I-N-G, capital J-A-M-E-S, King James, would, W-O-U-L-D. That's not the verb, that's not wood like you knock on wood. That is the verb would. Would not, N-O-T. Make sure you leave a finger space in between words. I have to use a pinky space. Your fingers are a little smaller than mine. Quotations, King James would not like, L-I-K-E, to, T-O, hear, H-E-A-R, that. You should all know how to spell that almost. That. Now, this is the tricky part. It's not tricky, but this is the part we want to be careful of. I'm going to put a comma because that's in the end of the part that the Queen said. King James would not like to hear that, comma, and then I'm going to put my quotation marks. And this time they're facing this way. At the beginning, they're facing this way because it's like putting a parentheses, or it's like we're enclosing the part that was the quote. So, King James would not like to hear that. And let's say said, S-A-I-D, said the, T-H-E, and then I'm going to make a capital Q for Queen because that's what they were calling her. And so that's a proper noun, Queen, and then a comma. And here's the last word. I couldn't get it all on there, gently, because she didn't speak harshly to the little girl. She spoke gently. G-E-N-T-L-Y. And what do we end a sentence with? A period. So we've just written our history sentence. King James would not like to hear that, said the Queen gently. All right. Hopefully you can write that yourself. And if not, you can have your mom or your dad write it for you, or a brother or sister. And then you can trace over it. And don't forget to color your picture. And this was the same picture that was in the book. She gathered some blossoms for the lady. And we're going to hear the rest of the story another day. I may do another one, not this week, but I may do 2 of them next week so we can get going in our history journal. Anyway, good luck coloring that page and writing our sentence with quotation marks. So that's something new that we did today. All right, I'll see you later. Bye.